Now, parenting. This is a piece that I don't think goes in the books, and maybe few people admit to. I can remember my body responding to things while my adult consciousness was trying to hang on, right? So those sexual urges start showing up usually around the same time that a person started being violated, right? Now, your body reacting and your brain screaming is that space is a guilt like that. I don't think very many people admit that. I can remember, diapering my first child and my body reacting to that. And my brain, right, just became fireworks. I don't even know the words to say, right? And I hurried up and put her diaper on, put her in the crib, locked her in her room, and left my house. Now, those kind of things had to happen for me a lot, right? Where, she was like a crack baby, right? She cried 24/7. And, that hypervigilance of sound and touch, right? She never wanted me to put her down. There was so much happening with the sensitivity and the flashbacks and the natural, or not natural, but they were for me, I guess, the programming that was rising out, right? She learned to walk at 7 months to console me, right? To pat me on the back as I was in a crumble. So the upside down in those relationships also comes in from the beginning, where, the child is saying, well, obviously this person can't really take care of me and I need to take care of her. We also have to recognize that men get quite the rap in this arena. And what I can say from my practice is I have just as many people abused by women as abused by men, and I'm speaking sexually. And, bottom line is we have birthed every man on this planet, and every man and every woman had a mother who either did her job or didn't. Yeah. Right. And, this knight in shining armor and damsel in distress is kind of absurd, and a lack of personal responsibility for women to a degree, right? I do find that, people that are abused by their mothers have a much higher hill decline. And, I can say, right, there were times that I could see the whites of my mother's eyes while men had their fingers inside of me. And, back against the wall, who are you mad at? Are you mad at the men or are you mad at your mom? Right? Where do you go from there if you know that your mother knew? Right? And we can also say that, for a child to be the other woman at age 5 is a complexity that adults blow up over, right? For an adult to be the other woman and having sex with a married person And, you know, bringing that complexity of maneuvering that triangle into their lives is a choice for an adult, you know, and this kid recognizing that they're the other woman and they're treated like the other woman by their mother. Yeah. And, you know, complexity enters everything. So we've got a child over here coloring, and we've got this child over here that's having to be the sexual partner to a married person. Now, another level of this, you know, I've worked with a lot of women whose husbands have, or partners have cheated on them, and they always know. Like, there's an inkling, like, where is my man laying his seed down? And if that's being true, and the seed is being released under the roof of that woman, it's difficult for me to reconcile that there isn't a level of knowingness. I've also worked with a lot of moms on the other side of that, and, you know, often they let things slip that make what I'm saying true. You know, I was working with this woman whose daughter had been molested, and she kept claiming she didn't know. And what was true is she had asked her daughter 3 separate times by the age of 12, right? Starting at 5. Had 3 different times. And, you know, she doesn't claim that that was true, but it's true. I mean, we ended up, by the end, she claimed that was true. And through those conversations, she would be so angry and adamant that she had no idea. And then she would say, when he just like almost like dementia, like where it would pop through, she would say something like, well, if he was in her room, he wasn't bothering me. Yeah. So, you know, I find it very difficult to think that mom doesn't know. And uncovering that, like this young woman and I have worked through a lot. And it took her being home for Christmas and being in her mother's house. She started having night terrors around actually telling her mother straight out when she was 7, right? And nothing changed. Yeah. So we have to recognize that, you know, if the words are said out loud, if you know that mom sees the value that this person feels on the planet is, you know, kind of like a dandelion. Yeah. For everybody's trying to get rid of you. Yeah. Now, these urges, like I was talking, right? It's consciousness and being able to say to yourself, yeah, like that's fucked up that I am feeling any sort of anything in my sexual being for an infant. Yeah. I mean, I almost put myself in a mental institution over that feeling, right? But what I can say is that that feeling brought up a frickin' bucket of download, right? Around my personal experience, which, right, subsided any sexual urges. Yeah? Does that make sense? Right? Having had, if I'd had a person to help me navigate that, like life would have been different very quickly. Now, that instinct, right? Those natural mother instincts that should be cultivated and passed on, right? You know, they're not there. They're not operating from that place of like, my baby's crying, I need to go hold it, right? Their body isn't like, you know, that has to be cultivated. We got to get them out of their head. The hypervigilance has to, the fear must be subsided for them to be able to, you know, pull this child into wholeness, right? Now, the most amazing thing is the work we can do with through mom, right? Mom, when mom's happy, everybody's happy is legit, right? Because they're all energetically connected to her for always, right? As above, so below. The umbilical cord is never cut energetically. So as mom moves into integrity and wholeness, her kids will shift very readily without having to go into therapy. Yeah. And if a child within our scenario is having difficulty, we can use mom as a surrogate, right? To work with the child without the child ever having to go into therapy and feel like something's the matter with them. Yeah.
Can you speak to this a little bit more deeply? I wonder, in my situation where I have estrangement with my older children, can something like this work?
Yes. Yes. I had a woman who was married to this very wealthy man. He was very abusive, and he spent a lot of energy dividing her family and making her the scapegoat of all of his poor behavior. And because of the money, the children were attached to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as we did her work, I'd be like, just stand still. And we'd send just like one text of like, I'm thinking about you, and you know, within a 3 or 4 month period of time, they were all like gravitating towards her, because mom is the backbone of everything, right? And a person never stops wanting their mom, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it was
that's true.
just last year when my dad died, like I called my mom and she's like making excuses and talking about how bad dad was. And I said, what I really need right now is my mom. I wish grandma were still alive. I will talk to you another time. Right?
Yeah.
You know, we're always searching for that person that, you know, I mean, because mom should be the most trustworthy person to us on the planet. Right? And that's
Yeah.
not always true. You know,
Thanks, Cherie.
yeah, for sure. So mom's love in these situations literally can, right, in an hour's period of time, go from micromanaging, because to her, that's what love is, the doing, right? I'm going to make sure they have their coat on, or blah, 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 all the things that you can think of that you're supposed to do from your head, you know? I was dating this guy, and he had this 11-year-old child, and he had custody. So he was trying to be mom, right? And, you know, he kept talking to me about how this child never slept. And I was over there one night, and he forcibly, you know, it's time for snack. He sits this child down in front of the TV with a chocolate bar and a Coca-Cola. Right? And that was his snack, and wondered why this child never slept, right? And, you know, switching that for him into, yes, it's beautiful that you're choosing a snack, right? I understand that you think and see that that's what's supposed to happen, and you're letting him choose, and that's not in his highest and best. Yeah. So it's funny, those weird micromanaging things that you know, they hang on to, while it's not supported in does that make sense what I'm saying? right?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is that they're micromanaging, but in the wrong direction.
Well, it's all from their head, right? So the idea is snack, not nourishing the child before they go to bed. It's knowing they have to have a snack, right? So it's up here in thought, not in like, well, right, like the snack that we choose is going to dictate the health of the child and how they're going to sleep. If you give a child a bunch of caffeine and sugar and try to get them to go to bed, they're probably not going to sleep, right? That was a huge thought for this human being to shift that, right? You know, and then, right, it would go from that micromanaging to weird little details to like the kid having complete run over things. You know what I mean? Where it was almost like from this micromanaging to a neglectful place, right? And because it's like that's when they choose to pay attention, you know, because it's not an inward connection to the child, it's an intellectual parenting, which is very different, you know. Yeah, managing the details, but not paying attention to what the child's actually doing. So like this woman is going to make sure her child's hair is done before they go to school, how it is done, and the quality of the experience for the child is not the point, right? And in this place, you can see this upside down starting to happen to where the child is moving into consoling the adult, right? And the adult has collapsed into childhood, right? So from that moment on, wherever it happens, adults are not to be trusted. Yeah. That program gets like, wow, she's not stable enough. I need to take care of her. And at this point, right, say we're clearing up all the loops and we're trying to organize and create strategy for their life out in front of them and for their family structure, right? It requires a vigilance. This is why I love Voxer, right? It requires vigilance over thought and word and action to keep, a survivor's child out of the same prison. And I love Voxer because, today everybody has a phone in their hand. And I urge people to speak rather than type because they're self-editing, right, when they type the words. But if they can speak into those moments, we can create real-time strategy. So I'll say, honey, let's take a deep breath, go in the bathroom and Voxer me, right? And from her depiction of that moment while she is emotional and in crisis, being able to say, okay, I see that. Why don't we go out and offer this, that, or the other? And let's see if we can reframe this situation, right? And it's amazing if we can get them to start seeing change within the moment, real time, right? That is lodging in their brain, like, oh, that works, right? It's going in the, oh, that works bucket, right? And often if they're in situations that are chronic with relationship, like we'll give one phrase, like, because most of the time they're working from emotion. So we want them to evaluate their emotion and offer an action, right? Because a person's emotional responses are for themselves, right? That emotion that we're erupting is information for ourselves to be able to offer the person that is causing the emotion a new action, right? So if we can move them into that place and get them out of trying to make people understand how they're feeling and move them into creating a new and different action. So, you know, if the husband is in there, you know, upset about something, we can come in and be like, okay, like, here's a scenario. I have this client whose husband works like a dog. She has 6 kids and she homeschools them, and they're all under the age of 8. Yeah, and 6 of them are boys. So this woman is just in overwhelmed dead run all the time, coming out of sexual trauma. Yeah, so she is in the doing. So she feeds each kid individually. There's never like a communal place for this man to come home to. I was like, okay, you know, is it possible for us to start having a family dinner where we bring everyone together? Let's make a new routine to where dad gets to go up, take a shower, have a few minutes by himself. He knows that he's coming to dinner. He's going to be fed. You're all sitting down together and your kids get a chance to share their experiences with him, right? She did that one time and she's like, oh my God, our whole evening was completely different. He was engaged. He sat down and played with the family. I'm like, yeah, honey, because like you made him feel valuable, right? It wasn't like, oh my God, you're home now, right? Let's give him something. He's working really hard. Let's get, you know, dangle a carrot for him. Let's create a space for him to move into family time from work time. Yeah. Family dinner is interesting for people coming out of trauma because a lot of trauma has happened to them during family dinner. And food is kind of a catalyst for suffering. So being able to reestablish that, I think often like creates a different relationship around food. It creates an intimacy and a bond between the people sharing the food. Right, and it also expands the ability for the child to interact and relate, and it expands their food palette. Yeah. Now, for a highly sensitive person, again with this woman and all these kids, I'm like, honey, you are a highly sensitive person. So I guarantee you that at least some of your kids are highly sensitive kids. And a highly sensitive kid that gets too much stimulation is going to be bouncing off the walls if we don't instill in them a way to manage that and have it serve them. Right. So right off the bat, we started initiating a communal quiet time. Right. You're like, hey, they can go color, they can read a book, but everybody goes to a specified place, and she does too. She's like, they won't stay in there. I said, give them a timer, right? Go buy some $3 timers and let them set it themselves, and they can watch how much time is ticking away, right? Those kind of strategies, people that are in overwhelm cannot think through for themselves. So when we can give them a very practical, tangible thing to do, and they can start witnessing change, right? That is a place that we can capitalize on and grow. So, you know, if a woman is getting ready to place her hands on the child, like literally, like, you know, and that often people are very honest, be like, you know, I'm hitting my kid and I don't know what to do, right? And I'm like, okay, we have to create some legit real-time strategy around this. Keep your phone around you, right? Take 3 steps back, put your hands behind your back. If you have to hold on to your hands, hold on to them, right? And go put yourself somewhere. Right? I used to lock myself in the bathroom. Right? Because I was like, oh my God, like, you know, the high level of sensitivity of the child with my level of sensitivity and overwhelm was like explosion time. Right? So creating, like Voxer, I'm serious, like has saved so many children distress. So when we can get a mom to pause, because if she can pause, she's going to want to do something different, right? So if we can get her to pause, and it usually takes something very physical, like, right, 3 physical steps back, stomp your foot 3 times, hit, you know, pat your leg, whatever that needs to be to reframe that moment, create some space between you and the child, and go call me, right? So that we can create, right, how to bring balance back to this child, right? Because I send her back in, right, to reprogram what just happened with that child, right? Be like, hey, go back in there and say, tell them, you know, hey, mama, this, that, and the other, right? And we create very succinct, right, responses to go back in with the child to rectify that moment, right? So that the child's not walking around with PTSD, right? Because in these kids, right, while this mom is wanting nothing more than love, she is creating, right, fire and hatred and a very long, slow simmer that's going to explode out in front of her at some point with this child. Yeah. And everything that she dreaded is coming to fruition, and she knows she's the cause of it. Now, again, I want us to like really lean into, if we can get a hold of mom, the kids never need to go to therapy, right? You know, I've got this woman of 5 came in, you know, and she wanted me to take all of her kids and her husband. And I said, you know, as I was, which, you know, would have been a huge money in my pocket, but at the same time, I didn't feel an integrity. I felt there was one highly sensitive daughter that my brain was pinging to, and mom. And I said, let's see what we do with the 2 of you first, and let's see if the dynamic of the family shifts, right? Which we're already starting to see a little bit of that happening, right? You know, it's interesting the backwards thought our society puts on children. The Humane Society, right, was formed in the 1600s. So we were recognizing that humans, right, were hurting their animals and their livestock, and created an organization to save the animals in the 1500s. The first Child Care Act in the United States was established in 1980. Right? We have had no value as adults on the experiences of children. And we have to recognize that, you know, highly sensitive, empathic children is like a young little wizard, right? With all these amazing gifts and powers that can go one way or another, right? The whole world is talking about narcissism. Well, we made them, right? A narcissist is a mind bender, right? They're amazing about getting through into people's heads. And bottom line is they learned that very well and used it, I'm sure, to survive and to move forward in life, right? That was a learned response, I do believe, right? And a victim is a narcissist as well, right? A victim sucks the life out of every room, and every scenario, every sentence begins with I. Yeah. So we have to recognize that if a person is in a victim mindset, right, while all they're thinking about is I need self-care, I need to think about self, I need to think about me, when that's all they're doing, right? That's all they're doing. It's just from a perspective of victimhood rather than a perspective of fixing it. Yeah. So it's interesting that as I'm working with people, and they'll be like, well, okay, my goal is to focus on myself. And I'm like, that's all you've been doing, right? Maybe it's to focus on what you might like, what you think you might want to do for maybe even someone else, right? We have to recognize that when we're in that victim mindset, we're mean, often very mean, right? Beautiful Kirsty, who came here, right, to Missouri, like, in that space of her responses, right, a huge part of her wholeness has been in recognizing that she does to others, right, what she despises being done to her. And that has been a huge recognition for her, to realize that her explosions around a person's behavior are causing more harm than what this person initially did. And I'm like, you could easily say no, thank you, right? Rather than calling people names and coming in, over the top like a hyena or and that is a space where, once we get this bus turned around, being able to recalibrate, right, their words and the behaviors and how they're showing up today is a very important part of this process, right? What I'm seeing, right, is that the focus has been on jumping. And I need to impart this as solidly as possible. If you were going to a surgeon and every time you went in, he wanted to cut on you, you would go somewhere else, right? We don't do surgery every session, right? And if we're going to do surgery, we have to be very clear about what we're intending to accomplish by the surgery, right? Some people, I may jump 10 times in a year, right? Because a lot of it is mental strategy and processing. Because if you choose where to jump strategically and the work is done within the jump, you don't need to keep doing it, right? Then it's about working with the information coming forward and how it's affecting their life today. It has to be integrated into their processing system. Yeah. Yeah, I can't emphasize this enough. When mom's happy, everyone's happy. When mom's happy and mom is operating from a place of integrity, it's very hard for her children to be out of integrity. It's very difficult, right? She is feeding them breast milk 24/7, not cow's milk. Yeah, that's the difference in that space of hypervigilance that we were talking about, right? Where a person is thinking about everything that, you know, they have read that they need to do through the day, but there's no instinct or no reason truly behind doing. You know what I'm saying? So what are we tracking? For these sexual victims, we're tracking, firstly, what are their current sexual abilities? Like, how are they showing up in this space? Do they get right up to orgasm and then collapse? Or get, you know, I know for myself, because a piece for kids that are going through sexual trauma is there's a battle that is going on between their conscious mind and their bodies, right? If somebody is touching your clitoris in an affectionate way, your body is probably going to react. Yeah. So often these kids were brilliant enough to create a program that's going to shut their body down so that they can think. Right. So often, right, we have to get in there and find out what that program is so that they can activate forward. Right now, again, those sexual responses from frigidity out to promiscuity, right? Now, like for someone like Brooke, right, where she's got 10, 15 sexual partners in one day, and the rest of the moments are filled with her masturbating. She had a 2-year-old, right? So we have to recognize how damaging those behaviors can be to those that come forward. We have to also analyze, right, are they engaging in sexual interactions that are physically harmful or possibly potentially dangerous to them? Say choking. Like, you know, for Brooke, being handcuffed to where she couldn't get away, right? Like being choked, like all these like very physical, potentially harmful things, putting your trust in another person to know when you have had enough choking, right? You know, her sexual partner was also very abused, and he came in, he was like, I'm afraid I'm not going to know when to stop the choking. Right. So you can understand the danger there. And these were two people that were both in therapy. Right. So people can get harmed very readily if we're giving somebody physical control over our bodies and not sure that that person is well enough to have that control. Yeah. Her husband prior used to handcuff her to the bed and beat her before sex, right? So she would come out bleeding, right? And all that was filtered into her having a positive, right, fulfilling sexual experience, right? So being able to bring those responses into balance, right? Brooke now lives in a very amazing scenario, and with that person, right, they've got a beautiful little family, but she had to learn what that was and what was acceptable for her, and she had to decide, right, who was trustworthy to be around her, and if she was trustworthy enough to have another person be around, right? You know, I mean, if you've got a 2-year-old running around with strangers coming in and out of the house watching you have sex, like there was a place in her mind, her adult conscious mind, that knew that there was so much potential harm, right, that was possible. These men could have affected her little girl and she wouldn't have even known it, right? Because she was getting to these psychotic type breaks. You know, she had alternate personality disorder. So, right, as we were pulling her fragments in and she was coming into integrity, we had to very strategically start creating new and different behaviors out front. right? Because she had sex in her world, like she was a porn star at 3, right? Yeah, and you know, if these behaviors, again, like Brooke, were dominating her life, that was no different than somebody being on crack or somebody being, right, an alcoholic. Yeah, like that craving was just the same, right? Hoarding, sexual gambling, all those fall into that same category when we're working to break them apart. The thing is with the sexual trauma, usually we're working way down deep in that child's space, right? And like for Brooke as well, like knowing that her parents were friends with the people that were doing that to her was a big problem, right? You know, we have to analyze and track how they receive touch. Now, often this person is going to be okay with touch if they initiate, right? If I'm reaching out to you to touch, but a random person coming up and touching, right? You know, some people like coming up, grab a boob from behind or whatever, and these folks like get completely undone. So we have to analyze how they're receiving touch today, what their responses are. Those are the places that you track, right? Because if you can wiggle into that spot where they're already in distress, finding that moment becomes readily available. Yeah. And like their manic tendencies, because like often like Brooke would go through a period of being very promiscuous like that and then like not leave her house, right? Not engage with anybody for a long time because she was trying to strong arm those urges, right? So, you know, a huge win with her was being able to have a male friend over without her initiating a sexual interaction, right? That was our goal. That was my goal for her for a real long time, right? And for her to be able to sit there and have a friend, right? Because she was usually the initiator in that.